All right, burning question, crypto question of the day. What is the difference between Bitcoin and, let's say, Ethereum? As if I know all these different types of cryptocurrencies, but I'm trying to understand what the difference is fundamentally. And also, do they have a limited amount that you can mine or produce similar to Bitcoin? So let's start
Great
there.
question. Great question. Welcome to the Kirk and Robin Show, bringing you crypto OG and newbie conversations in 21-minute chunks. So good to see you today, Robin, chiming in from Orlando, Florida here. As you can see, my background and my nice little plant. I'm out on the porch today. And so, yeah, that's actually a great question. That's one of the actually most important things to really understand when it comes to investing. It's the overall theme. I talk about having conviction and the mindset and all these different types of things. So one of the things one of the ingredients for long-term success is to really understand what you're investing in. I think we touched on that a little bit before, but
Mhm.
that's really in anything and for any asset, right? And so because otherwise you're just investing in hype, and you don't really have any basis for why you're putting your funds to work and so on and so forth. That's why I always say it's really important to understand Bitcoin and all the fundamentals of Bitcoin and how it works. I really spent a lot of time doing that because that becomes your basis for understanding everything else,
Okay.
right? Because
Yeah.
this is a whole new paradigm thing, right?
Hmm.
Because now the thing is like with the internet, you know, we've gotten to a point where people don't really care how the internet works and it just works well, and
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
get a
Yeah.
lot of value with it and so on and so on. It's an everyday thing that we use. So people don't care about that, but like it may be, I don't know, maybe that's the way it'll be one of these days with Bitcoin. But you really got to dive into it though and understand these technical things because again, it is a technology and it's important to understand it because then you can cross-reference it. Bitcoin becomes your stake in the sand. That is the key takeaway. It becomes your stake in the sand, and that's your reference point for everything else to say, how's it similar? How's it different? And so on
Okay.
and so on. So the Bitcoin's key, one of many key value propositions is the fact that it has a fixed and limited supply of 21 million coins, right? That is
Yes.
basically algorithmically programmed into the protocol, and you can actually graph it. There's a graph that shows that all of those bitcoins will be mined by approximately the year 2140. So although we're at 19 and a half or so at the current time, we've only got about 1.5 million bitcoin to go. It's a long tail, right? Because
Yes.
again, another one of the things is that the bitcoin supply gets cut in half once approximately every 4 years.
Okay.
So
This is
again,
the halvening or whatever I've heard you talk
yes.
about.
Correct,
Okay.
the halvening. Now, of course, I call it the halvening. That's kind of like
Sounds like a weird
crypto speak.
Netflix documentary or something.
People, I think people call it the halving. I'd say it's maybe 50-50. Actually, probably it's more, maybe more people call it the halving than the halvening. But to me, it's the halvening, right? It's kind of like crypto speak. So I like the halvening myself. Either will do. And there are other blockchains that do have halvings. Some of them are like Zen, for example, Horizon and the Zen token. That was a fork of Bitcoin at some point. And there's other proof of work models as well. So again, speaking to proof of work, that's how Bitcoin works. That's the security model. But not every blockchain uses proof of work. What's proof of work? Proof of work is where the participants basically show up, and we talked about this before, right? Where basically miners will show up voluntarily, buy computer equipment, and just hook it up to the network voluntarily without permission. So the computing power that they supply is what secures the network, and that's what a proof of work model is, right? Does that make sense?
Ish. Yeah.
Ish? Makes sense ish? Okay. Well, there's several different types of consensus models, but the other one, speaking of Ethereum, happens to be proof of stake. Okay. And that's probably the majority of blockchains now are proof of stake. Now there's other types of variations in between, but just focusing on those two models as the two different ones right now, that's the easier way to start. So
Okay.
Ethereum started as proof of work. And then in 2022, it transitioned to proof of stake called the merge. It was the big merge. Okay.
Pause for just a second. So let me make sure. Can you just synopsize it one more time? Proof of work versus proof of stake, because these are the fundamental differences you're going to be pointing to, correct? And if my mind wanders for just 2 seconds, I miss the whole thing. So I'm just thinking about other people who might have that problem.
Yep,
So
that's how easy you can miss it. Just trying to follow it, trying to visualize it in your own mind. Yeah, you can drift off. It's easy to
yeah.
do.
So
So,
proof of work versus proof of stake. Give it to me one more time, and so I can make
all
sure
right.
I'm
Well,
with you.
proof is. Let's start with proof of stake. So, you hear people talking about skin in the game. You got to have skin in the game. And you
Yep.
talk about like posting a bond, which could be for various reasons. You could post a bond, like in construction, you could post a bond, right? So that the stakeholders have a security and so forth.
Okay.
Um, and of course, we talk about post bonds, and when you have criminal proceedings and stuff like that. But basically, in this case, you're basically putting up the stake is your crypto assets. So in Ethereum's native token is Ether. Bitcoin's native token is Bitcoin, but Ethereum's native token is Ether. So you would stake Ether, as a validator to secure the network, right? So it's like a skin in the
Can
game
I
type of a thing.
sorry to interrupt you. So and the stake means like what's at stake in a way, or is it some other usage of the word stake?
Yeah, it's kind of like what's at stake, because what
Okay.
happens if you don't play by the rules? There's what's called slashing penalties, and that's a pretty universal term that's used among the proof of stake type blockchains,
Okay.
where you could be slashed, which means penalized, and you could lose some of your stake as a penalty,
Okay. All
right?
right.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's like stake in the game. Again,
All
skin in
right.
the game, stake in the game, and so on.
Okay.
Okay, so
All right.
that's a clear distinction between the two blockchains, specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? But again, going back to Bitcoin's fixed and limited supply of 21 million, Ethereum actually does not have a supply cap. Okay. Now, right
Oh,
now, the total supply of Ethereum right now is about 120 million tokens. Okay. But they also have made protocol changes because it's constantly changing all the time. And there was some adjustments made such that it was actually considered to be deflationary. Now it's kind of heading in the other direction a little bit. But what it just meant was that some tokens would be burned in the process of adding blocks to a blockchain, right? So basically what it means is the net between the new tokens that are uh, minted as a reward, okay, and the ones that are burned, that the net difference would be, that the supply would go down. Okay, that's deflationary. Okay, so that's a difference right there. Um, Now, like I said, in Bitcoin, the reward is cut in half every 4 years. That was what Satoshi designed in the Bitcoin white paper. Why?
wait, are you
No
gonna?
reason.
Sorry, are you gonna
Yeah.
talk about proof of work in this next bit that you're? Because I'm still like waiting for that
Oh, yeah.
distinction.
Proof of work. Yeah. So back to proof of work. So proof of work just means that, again, this I think this is a little bit more challenging to understand than the proof of stake, because we all kind of relate to the skin in the game
Mm,
scenario.
mm.
Proof of work means that you supply computing power, and the one who is able to, the miner who's able to actually, let's say, solve the puzzle faster than all the other miners, right, wins the block and then is able to add that block to the blockchain, and so on. So the blockchain itself uh, is actually is the record of all of the work that's been done over time, right? The total computational effort that's been done over time, whatever the blockchain is at right now, right? So
Okay.
as far as the miners piece of the equation, like whatever a particular miner added to the blockchain and the blocks that they mined, right? That's the proof that they did the work. Is when they win the block, they supplied the computing power. That's the proof that they did the work. So what else? Maybe it's easier to understand with another example. Okay.
But so it's rather literal in a way then, right? Proof of work, meaning they did the work, they can prove that they added to
Yeah,
the blockchain.
exactly. Like I did the
Okay.
work. Look, here it is right here.
Yeah.
I did the work.
Okay.
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 Think
Okay.
about the auditor.
Loosely, I can imagine all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Think
carry
about
on.
the auditor that does auditing, financial statement auditing, right?
Mm,
All publicly traded companies have to have financial audits, right? So the audit report, that's proof of work that you did the audit.
Okay.
And an audit
Yep.
report is actually really for the most part, a standard letter with standard language that's 1 or 2 pages. Like that's it. That's the proof of work. Now, there's a whole bunch of work underneath that.
Gotcha.
The other example is the Great Pyramid. That's proof of work that the pyramid was done because you can see it. It's physical, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it actually is a really simple concept. So again,
Okay.
that's a difference right there, right? But again, the fact that you have the halvening or the halving once every 4 years,
And
right?
the halving is only on for Bitcoin, or is it, does that happen with other
Other
crypto?
blockchains do have halvenings. Like I said,
Oh,
Horizon blockchain is a
okay.
proof of work blockchain. It's actually a fork of Bitcoin, and it also has the same thing. They just actually had a halvening a few months ago. It does not parallel or match, Bitcoin's, the timeline for Bitcoin. All right.
Mm. Hmm.
And so basically, Satoshi, you might ask, well, why every 4 years? Well, really for no reason at all, other than Satoshi made it up, right?
Huh.
This has never been done before. How would you know? How would you have anything to base on what the long term success of a blockchain of a brand new digital currency, right? Peer to
Mm.
peer electronic cash system
Mm.
where you don't need to have any trusted, or you don't need to rely on any intermediaries, right? Because they've been removed from the equation. We're trying to invent something. He was trying to invent something new that's never happened before. How would you possibly know whether a 4 year halving was well designed or not? I think it was
So
like, I just think it was like a best guess. And it's like, all right, because what we're going to do is we know that over time, theoretically, if the with the network effect, that the value of the Bitcoin, the token, is going to go up when the supply or the newly minted bitcoins goes down, right? So do you know what how many bitcoins were first in the first launch? How many
no
bitcoins
idea.
per block?
No
So
idea.
in the beginning days in 2009, it's 50 bitcoins per block.
Okay.
Okay, then 25, then 12 and a half, then six and a quarter, and right now we're 3.125 bitcoin per block every time a block is mined.
Okay.
Okay,
All
so
right.
that's that. So
And then regarding the halvening, I know somebody had recently asked you about, this is halvening similar to, say, a stock split? And because people in, financially trying to get their heads around like how that works, does it have any similarities, or it's really not that at all, because we're in just a different
no,
universe?
it's not that at all. There's
Yeah.
no semblance to a stock split whatsoever. So, on that note, basically a stock split, all it does is let's just to make up an example. Let's say the number of shares would double, stock price goes in half. So
Mm.
after a stock split, it's not like, oh wow, I got like free shares, and like in crypto we talk about airdrops, like free money falling out of the sky,
Mm.
like where basically coins are given away for free as an incentive for people to use, start using networks to jumpstart networks. That's not what a stock theoretically in a stock split. Yeah, if the number of shares doubles, the stock price goes in half. Nothing's changed. You still have the same amount of net worth, right? This is newly created coins, and the reason that they're newly created from the protocol, it seems like it's just like you know magically is produced out of thin air. Well, I mean, it is in a way, but the thing is it's a reward for the fact that the miners volunteer now. They don't have to. They don't even fill out an application, right? These are what you do with public blockchains: is you just show up and participate, or permissionless. So, what's going to incentivize a miner to go invest anywhere from thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, like these big miners do today, to go buy all this equipment and hook it up? What's going to incentivize you? You need to have a reward. So that's what the
Hmm.
Bitcoin reward is. The coin, Bitcoin, is the reward, and it obviously has value in trades and markets.
Mhm.
So you have that. But the 4 years is basically arbitrary, right? But that's just Bitcoin's blockchain.
Well, how would, when whoever started Ethereum, like, how does anybody just start a new currency, if you will? It's like, okay, we have that one over there. Now we're going to go do this thing, and it's like, well, who says and how and why? Um, is it like starting a new company, or what? What is it?
Well, Yeah, see, you're getting into another thing now
I don't
because
want to go
Bitcoin,
too far
like
down the
Bitcoin,
rabbit
is
hole,
not a
but
Bitcoin. The network is not a company. It doesn't have a CEO.
right,
Doesn't have a headquarters. Doesn't have anything.
right,
The
right.
same with
Understood.
Ethereum.
Yeah.
Now, with other projects, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll create a for-profit company, and then there's a foundation that supports the development of the blockchain ecosystem and so on, like that, right?
So they're called projects. That's
Well,
is
I
that
mean, they're
what
projects.
is
They're really networks.
okay?
They're network, but
So
they're
you
public networks.
public networks and you start a new network.
Now, the way they could be started is, first of all, somebody, you could have computer scientists to come together and say, you know what, we've come up with a novel way to create a new blockchain with a new type of consensus algorithm and so on, like that. Or you could just say, wow, we like that. There's an open source blockchain protocol, and we just want to fork that, and we're going to make some tweaks to it, and that's how we do it. So, like Litecoin, for example, is one of the early blockchain projects, and that was a fork of Bitcoin. And so
Hmm.
Litecoin, for example, has 84 million total token supply. And so it's very similar to Bitcoin in many ways, right? And then you have new projects that are a completely new consensus algorithm altogether, like Sui or Sui blockchain or Solana blockchain and stuff like that.
So
So
who decided that 84 million was the cap? I mean, like,
whoever
how?
made it up,
Okay, so
it's
that's
like,
made up. It
yeah,
just like Satoshi made up X.
yeah.
These
Everything in life
guys.
is made up. I mean, everything's made up.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's
Right.
where it
Right.
came
Right.
from.
Okay. Yeah. It's not like, but it wasn't some kind of like mathematical calculation, something or
Right,
other. It's just
exactly.
a.
That's what I'm saying. Even about the 4 years, the 4 year halving, I think that
It's
was
just
just like, you know
arbitrary.
what? Yeah, it was just arbitrary. Like I think, like I think that's what I'm going to come up with, or we,
Okay.
whoever it was,
Okay.
Satoshi, right?
Mm.
That was
Hmm.
like a best guess that we think this is what's going to sustain the network over the long time. Over the long term. Now, the other key takeaway here is community, because how are these blockchains? How do they evolve over time, right? So
And
basically,
how do they gain value too? Like okay, now we have this new, So speak to that. Like, and you just
well,
started to
first of
say
all,
about the
value comes
community.
from network effect, which is an existing concept. Anything like the
Okay.
use of telephones, mobile phones, radio, television, the more people that use it, the more valuable it can become.
Oh,
Right? It does
okay. All
become,
right. I like that.
right?
I like
The
that. The
network effect.
network
So
effect.
anything
Okay.
that anything that gains more and more users has a network effect, and the more
Okay.
users you
All
have, the
right.
more valuable it becomes. Simple as that.
Interesting. Yeah.
But the way that these public blockchains would become, the way that they evolve over time is they have the community comes together, basically in a decentralized fashion, right? And then they make choices to make upgrades. Now these things, because of that, typically take a long time to for community members, and which are largely developers and things like that. Like the developers are actually capable of deploying these types of changes and know the technical parameters, right? Those are the ones that. But there's other influence that happens as well. But at the same time, you got at this point you got billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars at stake on these networks. So you got to be slow and methodical and careful when you make changes and you launch upgrades. So so basically, both Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, operate. They have communities that come together. So you have Bitcoin improvement proposals, BIPs, and Ethereum EIPs, Ethereum improvement proposals. So there's a whole process. Some actually, and anybody, you could make a proposal. Actually, you could go to the GitHub. I think that's where it happens. You would make a proposal on anything, and it depends on whether people pick it up and say, "Hey, yeah, we think this is a good idea," and then you could have some technical people that chime in. And there's stages to it until it actually gets deployed. Now, many of these don't get deployed. Some of them take on a life of their own and change rapidly from the initial proposal into the final proposal and so on. But here's one key distinction around that is Bitcoin has been Bitcoin moves very slowly and adapts slowly. Okay, they don't move very fast. They don't make really major changes. Whereas Ethereum is moving faster and makes lots of upgrades. Of course, that has to do with scalability and keeping up with the competition, because there's a lot of Ethereum EVM compatible blockchains, right? Ethereum competitors that are faster and cheaper, right? So Ethereum's trying to catch up, and make these changes.
Faster and faster, meaning like they're creating more blocks on the blockchain. Is that what you mean by that?
More transactions in faster
Okay.
time. Your
And
transaction gets settled faster.
transactions being defined how in this context?
The number of transactions that you can flow through the system at any one time, right? But we're in our final minute, so we gotta wrap it up. So the
We
thing
sure
is,
do.
with Bitcoin, you might think that, wow, it doesn't move very slowly, but you know what? That's actually a key value proposition, because you can rely on the fact that that changes do not happen quickly, and not many changes take place, especially compared to other blockchains. So there's actually value in that versus another blockchain where it's making changes all the time, and so on and so on. You
So,
see?
just to
So
clarify, you said Bitcoin does not move slowly. I think you might have said it doesn't change slowly, but you meant
yeah, it
doesn't
doesn't
change
move very
quickly.
quickly. So anyway,
Okay.
we could go on and on about this, but that's our
For
21
another
minutes done.
time.
All right then.
All
Great
right.
talking
See
to you
ya.
today.